From legendary champions to dark overlords, the final bosses of Street Fighter each met their fate through epic clashes that reshaped the fighting world. Their defeats aren't just about lost battles, they're about shattered legacies, unleashed powers, and the spiritual cost of ultimate rivalries. Let's begin by uncovering how the mighty Muay Thai Emperor's downfall set the stage for everything that followed. Sagat is the original final boss of Street Fighter, the undefeated Muay Thai Emperor, towering over every challenger. Before Ryu came along, Sagat was invincibility personified, a legend whose name alone made opponents back down. His mastery of tiger shots and brutal strikes made him a mountain no one could climb. But then, in their legendary battle, that image breaks. Ryu's Shoryuken lands the decisive blow, carving a huge diagonal scar across Sagat's chest, an iconic wound that physically and symbolically shatters the Muay Thai king. What makes this moment unforgettable is the dark truth. Ryu's uppercut is powered by Satsui no Hado, a murderous energy Ryu barely controls. It's not just a punch, but a shared spiritual cost. Sagat's fall and Ryu's brush with darkness tangled forever in that strike. Before you dismiss Sagat as just a guy with a scar, hear me out. He survives the fight and lives on. But the legend of the invincible emperor dies that day. Sagat's identity fractures, haunted by loss and scar, sparking a thirst for revenge. This drives him into Shadaloo's shadowy world, where he abandons his honor for a darker path. Joining Masaber Bison's gang marks a brutal loss of pride, turning Sagat from champion to menace. His story isn't about death, but the death of a myth. The mountain that once seemed eternal toppled. That scar defines his legacy. The moment the unstoppable was stopped, with a cost that lingers long after. But if you think Sagat's fall is the darkest boss story, wait until you meet Shadaloo's tyrant. M. Bison isn't your typical final boss who just falls over and stays dead. His original body was destroyed by the very psycho power that made him terrifying, which is already a bad look for a villain meant to be immortal. But here's the twist. Bison's life is tied to a network of clone bodies and soul transfers, making him the ultimate disposable dictator. Take out one body, no problem, another is ready to house his consciousness. Before you write this off as comic book nonsense, the lore stays consistent. In Street Fighter Alpha 3, the destruction of Bison's base and Psycho Drive seemed like the end, yet he returns every time, proving that was just one vessel burning up. Then there's the famous but ambiguous moment in Street Fighter 2 where Akuma interrupts the final fight and nearly kills Bison with Shungoku Satsu. But that fight is more of an Easter egg than main story. Bison still keeps surviving. His immortality is tied to Shadaloo's psycho power farms and cloning tech, basically sick batteries, fueling his soul's repeated resurrection. Each defeat is dramatic but rarely final, until Street Fighter V, A Shadow Falls, where Ryu delivers not just a knockout to Bison's body, but to the psycho power itself. Using the power of nothingness, Ryu dissolves Bison into dust, toppling Shadaloo's empire and ending his influence. This death isn't just flair. It marks the fall of a global criminal regime powered by dark energy. With Bison gone, new powers rise. Psycho power's corruption is cleansed, at least for now. Bison's final death isn't just a defeat, but pulling the plug on a system that sustained him through clones and soul tricks. A fitting end for a villain who was never just one body, but a spreading poison holding an empire hostage. If you think that's a lot for one guy's death, just wait until we get to Akuma's messy story. Akuma is the embodiment of the Satsui no Hado fully embraced, the terrifying surge of murderous intent that turns a fighter into an unstoppable force of destruction. Where Ryu struggles to resist this dark power, Akuma has surrendered to it completely, letting it consume his soul and strip away all traces of humanity. His signature technique, the Shungoku Satsu, or Raging Demon, isn't just a flashy finisher, it's a soul-killing move that drags opponents into an endless torment, obliterating their very essence beyond the physical. Before you think Akuma is just a classic big bad, hear me out. He is more metaphor than mere villain. Akuma represents the ultimate temptation for fighters, the eternal challenge dangling just beyond reach. He's the dark horizon for Ryu and anyone seeking power without limits. While many bosses in Street Fighter have definitive deaths, Akuma's fate is consistently ambiguous. He shows up as a rare secret boss, often defeated by players, but never canonically bested by any story opponent. The lore leaves his survival open-ended, like a constant shadow waiting to pounce again. Take his legendary fights with Oro and Gen, masters who have matched or even survived his most lethal attacks. Their duels often end in draws or retreats, never with Akuma's death. Even when Akuma uses the Shungoku Satsu, it's a technique that brutally destroys souls, but his own soul remains untouched. still burning with raw killing intent. He is the dark reflection of what power unbound looks like, the path Ryu fears to tread but could theoretically take. Akuma's role is also a narrative device. He forces characters and players to confront the cost of surrendering to rage. Killing him outright would end that conversation. So, instead, he lives on as an eternal threat, a metaphor for the price of forsaking balance. His non-death is a curse and a warning all in one. If you think that ambiguous shadow is disturbing, wait until you learn about the next boss's claim to immortality. Gil. Gil is the definition of a boss who refuses to die, or at least refuses to stay dead. As leader of the Illuminati, Street Fighter's shadowy puppet masters, he's wrapped in fire and ice. Half his body burns red, the other half is encased in blue ice. This isn't just for show. It's a visual metaphor for his mastery over elemental resurrection powers, letting him rewrite defeat itself. Before you dismiss this as a gameplay gimmick, hear me out. Gil's signature resurrection super ties directly into the lore, meaning when you drain his health to zero, that's not the end. Unless you take special steps, he comes back to life, forcing you to beat him twice in one fight. This mechanic symbolizes a core truth. Killing Gil canonically is basically impossible. In the story, Alex is the only fighter who's ever claimed to defeat Gil, a win often treated as a canonical turning point. But here's where it gets weird. Even when beaten, Gil never truly dies. His regeneration kicks in, and he returns physically and ideologically intact. It's like trying to knock down the Illuminati itself. You might slay the figurehead, but the system endures. Gil's endurance represents a deeper theme. Street Fighter rarely spells out. Some powers aren't destroyed by punches or combos. They exist beyond death, embedded in ideas, institutions, and beliefs. He's the messianic villain embodying ideological endurance, not just personal invincibility. This delayed death keeps Gil a looming presence well past Shadaloo and Bison's defeat. He's the late timeline boss representing entrenched systemic power, the kind you can't wipe out with one knockout, but must dismantle piece by piece. So your win over Gil? It's temporary, a brief pause in a longer war. His defeat tests fighters, but leaves open the bigger question. Can any one fighter really end the Illuminati's reign? If you think Gil's story is confusing, wait until you meet Seth and his artificial quest for dominance. Seth is the ultimate tech Frankenstein of Street Fighter, a synthetic lifeform powered by the Tandon engine, a ruthless data-hungry core designed to absorb and replicate every fighting style on the planet. Unlike your average final boss with a vendetta, Seth isn't driven by personal motives or dark energy. He's essentially a walking, jacked-up AI prototype created by SIN, Shadaloo's weapon R&D arm gone rogue. The goal? To become the perfect fighter by stealing moves from the best, from Ryu's Hadoken to Bison's Psycho Crusher, literally making him the sum of every warrior's power. Before you tune out, Seth's downfall is more than just a generic villain get-down story. His destruction shows the inherent weakness of artificialized power. His Tandon engine core, this viral data-absorbing beast, is as unstable as it is powerful. In Street Fighter 4, after his sprawling tournament trap designed to feed his engine with fighter data, Seth is ultimately defeated when this core is destroyed in battle. The collapse of that heart meant more than just one body dying. It marked the total failure of the SIEN as an initiative, crippling the shadowy organization behind him. But Seth doesn't just disappear cleanly. The aftermath plays out across expanded storylines where Seth's failures leave Shadaloo scrambling, and remnants of his technology leak into new threats. Bison's lingering control and Juri's ruthless mission to eliminate related experiments keep the chaos bubbling. It's like a high-tech zombie saga where the monster's influence haunts every corner, proving no clone or AI can outsmart raw human spirit indefinitely. Here's the kicker. Seth's narrative death highlights the limits of cold, mechanical replication of power. No matter how many moves you download or bodies you reboot into, artificial strength collapses without balance, purpose, or soul. Seth's defeat tells us that the ultimate fighting spirit can't be copied, it has to be earned. And as wild as his digital Frankenstein story gets, this collapse sets the stage for the rise of darker, more metaphysical threats. If you thought Seth was a terrifying tech nightmare, just wait until we get to Evil Ryu, where the fight is not over data, but over the very soul of the fighter himself. Evil Ryu isn't your typical final boss who gets punched and falls over. He's more of a dark shadow lurking inside Ryu himself. This version of Ryu represents him giving in fully to the Satsu no Hado, that murderous energy that tempts fighters toward destruction and rage. But here's the twist. Evil Ryu's death is not about a body collapsing in the ring. It's a spiritual rejection of that dark path, a complete refusal to let that version of himself live. Before you write him off as just a what-if character, consider that evil Ryu embodies a potential future for Ryu that series lore strongly warns against. His appearances are mostly in ambiguous or non-canonical settings, like secret bosses or alternate endings, where he shows what happens if Ryu lets killing intent control him totally. In Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Alpha 3, evil Ryu is a hidden boss and a playable character who battles powerful foes, but never canonically kills M. Bison or stands over Shin Akuma. Those climactic moments belong to other versions like Shin Akuma or Evil Ryu's various fan interpretations. Think of Evil Ryu's fights as cautionary glimpses rather than fixed facts. What really marks Evil Ryu's end is the spiritual sealing by Guken, Ryu's master, who uses the power of nothingness, Mu no Ken, to imprison the Satsui no Hado inside Ryu, blocking it from overtaking his soul. This isn't a fight where evil Ryu collapses from a punch. It's more like an exorcism where the darkness is locked away, never fully allowed to surface as the main Ryu. Ryu's growth in Street Fighter V, defeating Bison without tapping into murderous intent at all, confirms that the Dark Ryu was a possibility that got shut down before it could fully bloom. So instead of thinking about evil Ryu dying in a traditional sense, see it as a story about purification and restraint. His defeat symbolizes Ryu choosing balance over power gained through anger. It's an internal victory, a rejection of temptation that could have consumed him. Sure, evil Ryu keeps coming back as a fan favorite form in extra modes, but canonically, he's a shadow that's been shut back into the dark. But if you think battling internal demons is intense, wait until we look at Oni, the monstrous form of Akuma that turns all control to chaos. Oni is the final, ultimate transformation of Akuma after he fully surrenders to the Satsui no Hado, the murderous energy that corrupts fighters in Street Fighter's darkest corners. This isn't just Akuma with a power-up. Oni represents a complete loss of humanity, a demonic being where all restraint and personal identity have been consumed by raw, destructive intent. Imagine Akuma at his most feral and unstoppable, a literal embodiment of death and destruction wrapped in glowing, otherworldly power. But here's the kicker. Oni only appears as a secret boss in challenge modes. He never surfaces in any canonical story. No cutscene confirms his existence, no character ever acknowledges fighting, or even seeing Oni outside of players unlocking him as a hidden encounter. His presence is purely hypothetical, a narrative warning of what could happen if Akuma fully gave in to darkness without limit. Think of Oni less as a villain who lived and died in the Street Fighter universe, and more as a cautionary future that must not happen. The heroes, Ryu, Guken, and others, symbolically prevent this catastrophe by resisting the full consumption of the Satsui no Hado. Oni's defeat, then, is conceptual. The very fact that this form has not taken over Akuma's soul means the fighters have effectively killed this version of him before it could arise. Players can beat Oni countless times, but those victories exist in a non-canonical gameplay space. There's no official story resolution where Oni is sealed away or destroyed, because his whole point is as an apocalyptic what-if scenario, a mirror reflecting the dangers of chasing power without balance. His moveset and terrifying design embody the penultimate power trip, but his death is purely theoretical, one born of heroes' choices to resist inward darkness rather than a physical battle lost in the wild. So Oni stands as a somber myth inside Street Fighter lore, the endpoint for anyone who lets fury and killing intent rule complete. Beat him in the game, sure, but in story terms, Oni is the shadow that says, this is the future we must never allow. Next up, if you think Oni's horror is complete surrender, wait until you see the cruel precision of Shin Akuma. Shin Akuma is basically Akuma turned up to an all-consuming force of destructive power, the purest expression of the Satsui no Hado unleashed without transforming into the full Oni demon. He represents that terrifying edge of Akuma's murderous intent, the point where raw killing spirit distills into ultimate combat prowess. This isn't your everyday boss fight. Shin Akuma usually appears as a secret or bonus boss triggered by specific hidden conditions, like in Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold or other special versions of the series. Now, here's the kicker. Shin Akuma's death is never treated as a canonical event in any official story mode. Unlike true final bosses with full narrative closure, Shin Akuma's defeat only happens in gameplay encounters, making his losses more about player skill than plot development. Every time you take him down, it's a badge of mastering the game's hardest challenges, not a story moment. For instance, there's no official Alpha 3 ending showing Shin Akuma defeated by evil Ryu. Fans have imagined or created that scene, but it doesn't exist in Capcom's canon. Instead, that idea serves as a symbolic fan interpretation of what would happen if these ultimate Satsui no Hado warriors clashed. not a true storyline event. The truth is, Shin Akuma's role is almost metatextual. He's the ultimate gatekeeper for players seeking to prove themselves against Akuma's full, deadly potential without crossing into demonic Oni territory. His repeated defeats are a signpost of skill and perseverance, a ritual challenge standing between casual players and the Mastery Elite. From a lore perspective, Shin Akuma occupies this gray zone between gameplay legend and canonical reality. Capcom treats him more like a gameplay concept. There is no powered-up Shin Akuma form triggered by taunts or commands in Street Fighter 6. That's fan myth blending with game mechanics, but not official. So, while Shin Akuma never truly dies in story, every player conquest acts like a ritual sacrifice to the gods of mastery. He's not a final boss you slay once and for all. He's a Dark Summit gamers keep climbing, falling off, and striving to conquer again. If you think beating one tough boss is satisfying, wait until you see the enigmatic JP, who takes villainy in a completely different direction. JP is a totally different beast compared to the bombastic villains before in Street Fighter. Instead of running a criminal empire with theatrical schemes, he's more of a modern corporate-style mastermind, blending ruthless business tactics with a psycho-magical energy that looks like M. Bison's psycho power, but isn't quite the same. He wields this eerie lilac energy to summon spikes, projectiles, and portals, controlling space with chilling precision. Imagine a shadowy CEO suddenly throwing knives made of psychic force. His main domain is the fictional nation of Nashal, which he manipulates through financial leverage, political puppeteering, and covert violence. Bosch, the closest thing Street Fighter 6 has to a classical hero, becomes obsessed with stopping JP. The game's climax has Bosch and the player teaming up to break JP's grip on Nashal. But unlike past bosses who exploded in flashy finales, JP's defeat is muted and ambiguous. He often just collapses under the strain of his unstable power or loses control of his psychic forces. The story leaves open the idea he might still be lurking, pulling strings behind the scenes. Here's the thing, JP's fall feels less like a heroic victory over a clear villain, and more like dismantling a shadow network deeply woven into global finance, law, and corruption. Whereas M. Bison's reign ended with a supernatural breakdown, JP's defeat reveals villainy embedded in everyday power structures. That makes it hard to say JP is truly dead in any satisfying way. The cold systemic corruption he represents doesn't vanish with him. Critics and fans note how JP's ambiguous demise contrasts sharply with earlier bosses. None of those flamboyant final blows, marking clear chapters here. Instead, it's a slow bleed. The corrupt system fractures, but the disease lingers. This echoes real-world cynicism about fighting entrenched global powers, making JP feel less like a cartoon villain and more a mirror of modern anxieties about invisible influence. Narratively, JP bridges Street Fighter's villains into a more complex era. Battles aren't just about beating tyrants, but wrestling systemic rot you can't punch away. His defeat ends the immediate crisis in Nashal, but leaves open the unsettling idea that this corruption could resurface elsewhere anytime. So, unlike the explosive psycho power dust that took down Bison, or the brutal finality of past bosses, JP's downfall is deliberately unresolved. His legacy reminds us that sometimes evil isn't a person to kill, it's a system to dismantle, and that's a much messier fight. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.